Went to my son-in-law's office building that Tuesday night and saw my wife's car parked in the shadows where it shouldn't have been. The truth I discovered will haunt me forever, and it could be happening in your family right now. What I heard next destroyed my world and changed everything I thought I knew about the people I loved most.
Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're listening in the comments. When the old Mexican finally dies, we'll have everything we planned for. Victoria's voice drifted through the half-open window like poison in my veins. I sat frozen in my Ford F-150 outside the Richardson and Associates law office, keys still dangling from my trembling fingers. 10 minutes ago, I'd been driving back from our San Antonio restaurant branch, planning to surprise my wife Victoria with an early return from what was supposed to be an overnight business trip. Instead, I was staring at her silver Lexus hidden behind the building I'd spent $180,000 helping my son-in-law Marcus Richardson establish 2 years ago. Victoria was supposed to be at her sister Rosa's house 30 miles away, having their weekly movie night. She'd texted me just 3 hours earlier. Having fun with Rosa. Drive safe, mi amor. See you tomorrow. Yet here she was, at 10:30 p.m., in a law office with my daughter's husband. I killed the engine and crept toward the side window, my 65-year-old knees protesting every step. Through the gap in the blinds, I could see them clearly. My wife of 30 years reclining on the leather couch like she owned the place, and Marcus leaning against the bookshelf with that expression I'd mistaken for professional confidence. "The timeline's perfect," Marcus was saying, his voice carrying the crisp satisfaction of a predator discussing his prey. "File for divorce in June. Claim irreconcilable differences." With Texas community property laws, Victoria gets half of everything acquired during the marriage, plus lifelong spousal support. Victoria laughed. That musical sound I'd fallen in love with when she was 19 and I was 35. The restaurant chain alone is worth $28 million. Add the real estate portfolio, investment accounts, vacation properties. We're looking at $35 million total. My hands shook as I fumbled for my phone, hitting record just as Marcus continued his legal dissertation. "The beautiful part is David's trusting nature. The old fool has no idea we've been documenting his assets for months." He gestured toward a thick manila folder on the coffee table. Bank statements, property deeds, business valuations, insurance policies. Everything's already copied and analyzed. He practically handed us the blueprint to dismantle his own empire. 2 years of playing the devoted wife, Victoria said, examining her nails with the casual indifference of someone discussing the weather. Pretending to care about his boring restaurant stories, nodding sympathetically when he worried about payroll, acting interested in his Mexican traditions. Her voice turned venomous. "God, the man actually believes I love him." The words hit me like physical blows. 2 years. She'd been planning this betrayal for 2 years while I brought her flowers every Friday, while I took her on anniversary trips to Guadalajara, while I proudly introduced her at business dinners as the woman who makes everything worthwhile. A branch snapped under my foot. Both conspirators froze mid-conversation, heads snapping toward the window like startled animals. I pressed myself against the brick wall, heart hammering so loud I was sure they could hear it through the glass. "Did you hear something?" Victoria's voice carried sharp suspicion. "Probably just a stray cat," Marcus replied, but his eyes remained fixed on the window. "You're being paranoid, Victoria. Can you blame me? If David discovered this before we're ready to execute, he won't." Marcus's laughter held nothing but contempt. The man couldn't spot a conspiracy if it came with subtitles. "By September, you'll be divorced, wealthy, and free to pursue whatever relationship you choose. The implication in his tone made my stomach turn. Whatever relationship. How long had this been going on? How many lies had I swallowed while they planned my destruction? I forced myself to remain hidden as their conversation resumed, my phone capturing every calculated word, every casual dismissal of 30 years of marriage and sacrifice. When they finally began gathering papers 15 minutes later, I crept back to my truck on legs that felt like they belonged to someone else. Sitting in the driver's seat, I stared at my hands. Hands that had built the Corazon empire from a single food truck. Hands that had worked 16-hour days to provide every luxury Victoria enjoyed. Hands that had signed the checks funding Marcus's law practice. Victoria's voice echoed in my memory. The man actually believes I love him. Until 45 minutes ago, I absolutely did. The drive home took 15 minutes through empty streets, the weight of the recording in my phone heavier than any burden I'd ever carried. Behind me, two people I'd loved and trusted were probably already planning their next move, confident that their victim remained oblivious. They thought they were playing chess with a simple restaurant owner who'd never learned the rules. They were about to discover that the man who'd built a multi-million-dollar empire from nothing had been underestimated for the last time. But this was only the beginning. What I would uncover in the coming days would make their financial conspiracy look like a minor betrayal compared to the true depths of their deception. The real shock was still waiting to surface, and when it did, I'd realize they weren't just planning to steal my money. They were planning something far worse. The 15-minute drive home passed in a blur of traffic lights and muscle memory. My Ford F-150 found its way into our circular driveway without conscious direction, past the manicured gardens. Victoria insisted we pay someone else to maintain past the fountain she'd commissioned for our 25th anniversary. Back when I still believed our marriage was worth celebrating. I sat in the car for several minutes, staring at the house I'd built with money earned from 16-hour days and calloused hands. Every brick, every window, every carefully chosen detail had been a love letter to the woman who was now plotting to steal it from me. The recording in my phone felt heavier than any burden I'd ever carried. 43 minutes of crystal-clear evidence that would change everything. But evidence meant nothing without the right strategy, and 30 years of building a restaurant empire had taught me that the first response to a crisis often determined everything that followed. The front door opened into silence that felt different now. Not peaceful, but hollow. Victoria's presence had always filled these rooms with chatter about her day complaints, about neighbors, excitement over new purchases. Now I wondered how much of it had been performance carefully crafted to maintain the illusion while she and Marcus planned my destruction. I walked through our home like a stranger seeing it for the first time. The wedding photo on the mantel caught my eye. June 15, 1994. Victoria radiant in ivory silk, me awkward in a rented tuxedo, both of us glowing with what I'd believed was genuine happiness. She'd been 20 working as a waitress at Rosario's Mexican kitchen downtown. I was 35, my restaurant business finally turning real profit after 10 years of 16-hour days and instant ramen dinners. We'd met when she'd applied for a server position at my original Corazon location. I'd hired her on the spot, not just for her smile, but for the way she'd argued with me about fair wages for kitchen staff. "You're not just hiring employees," she'd said during that interview. "You're building a family. Families take care of each other." I'd fallen in love with her principles before I'd fallen in love with her face. The irony tasted bitter now. Our first date at Casablanca had stretched until midnight. She'd listened with genuine fascination as I described my dreams of building something lasting, something that would outlive us both. Her eyes had sparkled when I talked about the restaurants I wanted to create, the communities I wanted to serve. "You're not just building businesses," she'd said, reaching across the table to touch my hand. "You're building legacy." I'd proposed 8 months later. We'd been so young, so certain that love could conquer every obstacle. She'd been pregnant with Sophia by our first anniversary, and those early years had been the happiest of my life. Victoria threw herself into motherhood with the same intensity she'd once brought to waiting tables, documenting every milestone, every smile, every first word. But 30 years was a long time. Long enough for gratitude to transform into entitlement, for thank you for providing this life to become we deserve so much more. The woman who'd once admired my work ethic had apparently grown to resent it, viewing my 16-hour days not as sacrifice for our family, but as abandonment of her needs. The recording on my phone held the ugly truth. Victoria hadn't loved me in years, possibly not since Marcus entered our lives 2 years ago. Every kiss, every anniversary celebration, every te amo whispered in the darkness had been calculated. Manipulation designed to keep me working, earning building wealth she could eventually claim as her own. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found the number I needed. Roberto Chen, my accountant for 15 years, the man who'd helped me navigate every major financial decision since Sophia was in middle school. Roberto. His voice was groggy with sleep. "David, Jesus, it's almost midnight. What's wrong? I need you to freeze every joint account immediately," I said without preamble. "Every credit line, every automatic payment system, everything with Victoria's name attached." Silence. "Then David, that's a nuclear option." "What's happened?" "Victoria's planning to divorce me and take half of everything. She's been documenting our assets with Marcus Richardson for months, building a legal strategy to maximize her settlement from our 30 years of marriage." Jesus Christ. Roberto was fully awake now. "How do you know this? I have recordings. 43 minutes of them discussing how to divide the $28 million restaurant chain plus all our other assets. Can you implement the freeze tonight? Give me 2 hours." "But David, this is going to cause immediate problems. The moment she tries to access anything, that's the point. I want her panicked and making mistakes." While Roberto worked his financial magic, I made my second call to Mike Santos, a private investigator I'd used for employee background checks over the years. Running 25 restaurants required careful vetting of management staff, and Mike had always been thorough and discreet. "Mike, I need comprehensive surveillance starting tomorrow morning. My wife, Victoria Martinez, and Marcus Richardson, the immigration lawyer on Commerce Street. I want to know every meeting, every phone call, every movement. Domestic situation, conspiracy to commit fraud involving $35 million in assets, potentially more. I'll have 2 teams ready by dawn. What's your budget? Whatever it takes to protect what I've built." My third call went to James Santos, Mike's brother and one of the most respected family law attorneys in Texas. I'd met him at several Chamber of Commerce events, always impressed by his reputation for thorough preparation and aggressive advocacy. "James, that there's need to see you first thing tomorrow morning. Emergency consultation about asset protection and divorce fraud." "How serious are we talking?" $35 million serious. 30 years of marriage about to be weaponized against me. I'll clear my schedule. Bring everything. Financial records, business documents, anything that might be relevant. I spent the next hour walking through our house room by room, seeing everything with new eyes. The kitchen where Victoria made my coffee every morning while chatting about her plans for the day. How many of those plans had involved meetings with Marcus? The living room where we'd hosted dozens of dinner parties, Victoria playing the perfect hostess while I grilled carne asada for guests. Had she been performing for my benefit during these past 2 years, my phone buzzed at 12:47 a.m. "Roberto. It's done. Every joint account is frozen pending identity verification. She'll need to appear in person with photo ID and secondary documentation to access anything. How long before she discovers the freeze the moment she tries to use a card? Could be hours, could be days, depending on her spending patterns. What about the restaurant accounts? Those were already protected under the corporate structure we set up in 2018. She never had direct access to the Corazon chain funds or the real estate portfolio. Thank God for Roberto's paranoid attention to asset protection. What Victoria and Marcus thought they'd been documenting was only the visible portion of an iceberg. The real wealth, the offshore accounts, the holding companies, the trust structures we'd established for tax optimization remained invisible to their amateur reconnaissance mission. They'd been cataloging the decoy kingdom, while the crown jewels stayed hidden in plain sight. Victoria's headlights swept across our driveway at 1:15 a.m. I was in bed pretending to read a restaurant industry magazine when she slipped into our bedroom. "Sorry I'm so late, mi amor," she whispered, moving through her nighttime routine with practiced quiet. Marcus had more immigration files than expected. You know how complex these cases can be. The lies flowed so smoothly, I almost admired the craftsmanship. "No problem," I said, not looking up from my magazine. "How's Rosa doing? You were supposed to be watching movies with her tonight." A pause so brief I almost missed it. "Oh, you know Rosa. Same complaints about her husband, same gossip about the neighbors. We ended up just talking instead of watching anything." She climbed into bed beside me, her body warm and familiar against mine. For a moment, muscle memory almost overrode conscious knowledge. This was Victoria, the woman I'd loved for 30 years, the mother of my daughter, my partner in building what I'd thought was the American dream. Then I remembered her voice. The man actually believes I love him. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, while Victoria's breathing gradually evened into sleep. Tomorrow morning would bring the first test of her acting abilities, when her credit card got declined at her weekly breakfast with the country club wives. I was curious to see how quickly the devoted wife routine would crack under financial pressure. But what I didn't know yet was that freezing the accounts would trigger something far more dangerous than panic. Victoria and Marcus had been planning for contingencies, and my defensive move would force them to accelerate their timeline in ways I couldn't have imagined. The financial conspiracy was just the beginning. The real horror was still waiting to surface, and when it did, I'd realize they weren't just planning to steal my money. They were planning to make sure I'd never be able to fight back. Victoria's credit card was declined at exactly 11:47 a.m. the next morning, while she was having breakfast at the Riverside Country Club with 3 other construction wives. I knew this because Roberto had programmed alerts to notify us the moment any frozen account was accessed. What I didn't expect was the phone call that came 2 hours later. "David, something terrible is happening with our accounts." Victoria's voice carried perfect confusion mixed with just the right amount of panic. My card was declined at lunch, and when I called the bank, they said there's a security hold. Do you know anything about this perfect innocence? No mention of the joint account with Marcus's name that I'd discovered during Roberto's deeper investigation. No acknowledgement of the missing $47,000 she'd been funneling to their shared savings account over the past 8 months. Security hold. I kept my voice concerned but calm. That sounds serious. Did they say what triggered it? Something about verifying identity and account access. It's embarrassing, David. I'm sitting here with Linda and Susan and Janet, and I can't even pay for my own meal. The distress in her voice was genuine, not because her conspiracy was threatened, but because her social status had been publicly compromised. After 30 years of marriage, I knew Victoria's priorities. "I'll call Roberto immediately," I assured her. "We'll get this sorted out." But I didn't call Roberto. Instead, I drove to Mike Santos's office to review the surveillance footage his team had already gathered. What I saw made my blood run cold. Victoria and Marcus weren't just meeting at his law office. They'd been having intimate dinners at hotels across Fort Worth, holding hands like teenagers kissing in parking garages. The affair had been going on for at least 18 months, not the 2 years of planning they'd discussed, but a full year and a half of betrayal. But it was the footage from yesterday afternoon that stopped my heart. Marcus was showing Victoria documents spread across his desk. I could see her nodding, taking notes, asking questions. Then he pulled out a thick folder labeled Martinez Life Insurance and pointed to specific sections while explaining something that made Victoria smile. That smile. Cold, calculating, satisfied. Mike enhanced the audio from his directional microphone. We caught fragments of their conversation through the office window. The policy increased to $10 million last month, Marcus was saying. Double indemnity for accidental death brings it to $20 million total. Victoria's voice was barely audible but clear enough. And the restaurant business provides so many opportunities for accidents. Kitchen fires, gas leaks, late-night robberies. My hands went numb. They weren't just planning to divorce me and take half my assets. They were planning to kill me and take everything. David Mike's voice seemed to come from far away. "You okay?" "Keep recording," I managed to say. "I need everything they say about this." The enhanced audio continued. Marcus discussing how insurance companies rarely investigated accidents thoroughly when the deceased had a history of working late hours alone at restaurant locations. Victoria asking about time frames, about whether there would be waiting periods, about how quickly claims typically paid out. I drove home in a daze, the reality of my situation settling like lead in my stomach. For 2 years, while I'd been working 16-hour days building our future, my wife had been planning my murder with the man I'd helped establish in business. The insurance policy she'd mentioned wasn't news to me. Victoria had suggested increasing our coverage 6 months ago, claiming she'd been reading articles about inflation and the rising costs of final expenses. I'd signed the papers without question, trusting her to handle the family finances she'd always managed so efficiently. Now I understood why she'd been so insistent about the increase, why she'd specifically requested the double indemnity clause for accidental death, why she'd chosen a company known for quick payouts to beneficiaries. My phone rang as I pulled into our driveway. "Roberto, David, we found something else. That joint account Victoria opened with Marcus. They've been researching more than just divorce law." "What do you mean Marcus has been using his legal database access to research insurance fraud cases, specifically cases where claims were denied due to suspicious circumstances? He's also been looking up restaurant fire investigation procedures and coroner protocols for determining cause of death." The pieces clicked into place with horrible clarity. They'd been planning this for months, studying how to commit the perfect murder and make it look accidental. The gas lines at any of my 25 restaurants could be tampered with. A kitchen fire during late-night inventory could trap someone inside. A robbery gone wrong in a dark parking lot after closing time. I'd been handing them the murder weapon every time I worked late at a remote location. But you want to know what they found? Most interesting. Roberto continued. Cases where the insurance company paid out quickly to avoid litigation when the beneficiary was a grieving widow with no apparent motive. A grieving widow who'd recently discovered her husband's controlling financial behavior and was considering divorce. A woman whose friends would testify that she'd been unhappy, but trying to work things out for the sake of their 30-year marriage. The perfect victim narrative was already in place. "I need you to document everything I told Roberto. Every transaction, every research query Marcus made, every deposit into their joint account. I want a complete financial trail showing premeditation, already on it. But David, if they're planning what we think they're planning, you need protection. Physical protection, I know. I'm calling Mike Santos now. The enhanced surveillance began that evening. Mike positioned teams at all 25 restaurant locations monitoring for any unusual activity. Motion sensors were installed at the flagship location, where I most often worked late. Camera systems were upgraded to include audio recording. But the most chilling discovery came when Mike's tech specialist hacked into Marcus's laptop during a routine visit to his office to discuss immigration paperwork for one of my kitchen managers. We found their complete timeline, Mike reported that night. They were planning to wait until after the divorce filing to avoid suspicion, but your account freeze has forced them to accelerate everything. What do you mean they're meeting tonight at 10 p.m.? Same location, his office. Based on their messages, they're discussing moving to the final phase within the next week. My hands shook as I processed this information. Freezing the accounts hadn't just protected my assets, it had triggered a murder timeline. But there's something else, Mike continued. Something that makes this even worse. What could be worse than my wife planning to kill me? Sophia's pregnant. 3 months along. Marcus found out yesterday, and he's furious. He thinks a grandchild will complicate the insurance payout, make you harder to kill because you'll be more focused on family time instead of working late alone. The room spun around me. My daughter was carrying my grandchild, and her husband was angry because it might interfere with murdering me. They're planning to eliminate you before Sophia starts showing, Mike said quietly. Before you become a devoted grandfather who might change his work habits. I sat in my home office surrounded by 30 years of honest work and family photos and realized that the people I'd loved most in the world had been planning my death with the same cold calculation they'd used to plan a business merger. But what Victoria and Marcus didn't understand was that the man who'd built an empire from nothing had learned a few things about survival along the way. They thought they were hunting a trusting old fool who'd never see them coming. They were about to discover that their prey had been watching them all along, and now the real war would begin. The call came at 6:30 a.m. 2 days after I'd discovered the murder plot. Sophia's voice was tight with confusion and something that sounded like fear. "Papa, I need to talk to you. Can you meet me at the original Corazon location before it opens?" "Of course, mija. Is everything all right? Just please come alone. And don't tell anyone we're meeting." I arrived at 7 a.m. to find Sophia already sitting in the empty restaurant, her hands wrapped around a cup of coffee that had clearly gone cold. At 30 years old, she'd inherited Victoria's beauty, but with an intelligence and directness that was purely her own. The psychology degree she'd earned had served her well in her work as a family counselor, and I could see that analytical mind working now. "Papa, sit down. We need to discuss what's happening between you and Mama." I slid into the booth across from her, the same red vinyl seats where I'd made my first business deals 3 decades ago. The irony wasn't lost on me that we were having this conversation in the place where everything began. "What's your mother told you that you've been acting strangely? Paranoid about money, suspicious of her activities, asking weird questions about her schedule. She's worried about your mental state. And what do you think?" Sophia studied my face with the clinical detachment she'd learned from years of treating troubled families. "I think Mama is trying to manipulate me the same way she's apparently been manipulating you." My heart stopped. "What do you mean?" "Yesterday she asked me about Marcus's work schedule, specifically about cases that might require late-night research. She wanted to know if he'd mentioned any restaurant owners having problems with insurance claims or kitchen accidents." The blood drained from my face. Sophia was 30 years old, 3 months pregnant with her first child, and her husband was planning to murder her father. Then she asked me something that made my stomach turn, Sophia continued. She wanted to know if I thought you'd been working too many late shifts alone, if I was worried about your safety, given all the crime targeting small business owners lately. The setup was even more elaborate than I'd realized. Victoria was positioning Sophia to be a witness to my dangerous work habits, someone who could testify that the family had been concerned about my safety long before any accident occurred. "Papa, I need you to tell me the truth. Is Mama having an affair with Marcus?" The question hung between us like a loaded gun. I looked at my daughter, this brilliant woman who'd built her own career helping families navigate crisis, and realized I couldn't protect her from this anymore. "Yes," I said quietly, "for at least 18 months. Sophia's composure cracked slightly, her hands clenching once before relaxing. The psychology training held as she processed this information with professional detachment. "And they're planning to divorce you and take half of everything." "Yes. But Mija, it's worse than that." I pulled out my phone and showed her the insurance documents Mike had photographed. The $10 million policy, the double indemnity clause, the research into accidental death investigations. "They're not just planning to divorce me," I said as gently as I could. "They're planning to kill me." Sophia stared at the documents for a long moment, her face cycling through emotions too quickly to track. When she finally looked up, her eyes held a coldness I'd never seen before. "Show me everything." For the next hour, I laid out the complete conspiracy. The recordings from Marcus's office, the surveillance footage of their affair, the financial documentation showing months of planning the research into restaurant accidents and insurance fraud. Sophia listened without interruption, taking notes with the methodical precision of someone building a case file. When I finished, she sat back and studied her notes. "This explains so much," she said finally. "Marcus has been asking me strange questions about your routines, about which restaurants you visit most often, about whether you ever work alone after closing time. I thought he was just making conversation, trying to bond with his father-in-law. He was gathering intelligence for a murder." And the pregnancy, Sophia's hand moved instinctively to her still flat stomach. "Does Marcus know I told him 3 days ago, thinking he'd be excited about becoming a father? Instead, he seemed angry, like the timing was all wrong. Because a grandchild would change my work patterns. I'd want to spend more time with family, instead of working late alone at remote locations." Sophia's training kicked in as she analyzed the psychological profile we were building. A narcissistic personality who views relationships as transactions. No genuine emotional attachment, just calculations about personal benefit. The pregnancy threatens his timeline because it makes the target harder to isolate. My daughter was discussing her husband's plan to murder me with the clinical vocabulary of her profession, and it was breaking my heart. "Papa, I need to ask you something, and I need you to tell me the truth. Are you planning to take revenge? Are you going to hurt them?" The question surprised me. "I want justice, Mija. I want them stopped before they can hurt anyone else, but I'm not a killer." "Good. Because I'm going to help you, but only if we do this legally. My professional ethics won't allow me to be part of anything that could harm them physically." Relief flooded through me. "You believe me, I believe the evidence. And I believe my professional assessment of Marcus's behavior over the past 18 months. The manipulation, the information gathering, the way he's been subtly isolating me from you and Mama." Sophia stood up and began pacing, her analytical mind shifting into problem-solving mode. "We need more evidence. Recordings of them discussing the murder plans. Documentation of Marcus's research, proof of premeditation that will hold up in court. Mike Santos has teams monitoring them constantly. We should have that evidence soon, and we need to protect you while ensuring they don't suspect we know anything. If they realize their plan has been discovered, they might act immediately instead of waiting for the perfect opportunity. I've been varying my schedule, never working alone at remote locations, always making sure someone knows where I am." "That's good, but it's not enough." Sophia pulled out her phone. I'm going to confront Marcus tonight, but not about the murder plot. I'm going to tell him I know about the affair and I want a divorce. Mija, that's dangerous. If he thinks you're a threat, he won't. I'm going to play the devastated wife who just discovered her husband's infidelity. Someone focused on her own heartbreak, not investigating a larger conspiracy. It will give us cover while we gather the final evidence we need. The plan was risky but brilliant. Sophia would use her psychology training to manipulate Marcus into believing she was emotionally shattered rather than strategically planning his downfall. But there's something else we need to discuss, Sophia said, her hand moving to her stomach again. This baby. If we're going into a legal battle that could last months, if we're exposing a murder conspiracy that will destroy both their lives, I need to know you'll help me raise this child alone. The question hit me like a physical blow. My grandchild would grow up without a father because that father had tried to murder his grandfather. Of course, I said. This baby will be loved and protected no matter what happens. Good. Because tomorrow night after I confront Marcus, everything changes. We stop playing defense and start destroying them with their own evidence. Sophia gathered her notes and stood to leave but paused at the door. Papa, I want you to know that whatever happens, I'm proud to be your daughter. Marcus thought he could use my psychology training as a weapon against you, but instead it's going to be the tool that brings him down. After she left, I sat alone in the empty restaurant where my American dream had begun 30 years ago. Outside, Fort Worth was waking up to another day, unaware that in this small Mexican restaurant, a family was preparing for war. But what none of us realized was that Marcus had been monitoring Sophia's behavior just as carefully as we'd been watching him. And when she confronted him that night, his response would force all of us into a deadly game where the stakes were no longer just money or justice. They were life and death, and the timer had just started counting down to 0. Sophia confronted Marcus at 8 p.m. that night in their modest 2-bedroom apartment in Arlington. I knew this because Mike Santos had positioned audio surveillance equipment in their building's ventilation system earlier that day, with Sophia's permission. What I heard through my earpiece made my blood freeze. Marcus, we need to talk about your relationship with my mother. Sophia's voice was perfectly controlled, carrying just the right amount of hurt confusion. Her psychology training was serving her well as she played the devastated wife discovering an affair. What relationship? I help Victoria with legal documents sometimes. Immigration paperwork can be complex for restaurant employees. Don't lie to me. I've seen the hotel receipts in your wallet. I've noticed the late-night phone calls. I know you're sleeping with my mother. A long pause. Then Marcus's voice cold and calculating. You're being paranoid, Sophia. Pregnancy hormones can cause emotional instability. I'm being observant. There's a difference. What I heard next chilled me to the bone. Instead of denial or guilt, Marcus shifted immediately into attack mode. Actually, I'm glad you brought this up. I've been documenting some concerning behavior from your father that I think you should know about. What are you talking about? David has been making threats, Sophia. Against me, against your mother. He's been following us, taking pictures, making accusations about financial impropriety. Yesterday, he came to my office demanding to see client files, claiming I was stealing from him. Every word was a lie delivered with the smooth confidence of a practiced manipulator. That doesn't sound like Papa, doesn't it? Think about his behavior lately. The paranoid questions about money, the suspicious phone calls, the way he's been isolating himself from family activities, and the drinking, Sophia. Have you noticed how much his alcohol consumption has increased? I gripped my phone tighter. Marcus was building a narrative of an unstable older man driven to paranoia by business stress and alcohol, someone who might become violent when confronted with evidence of his delusions. Papa doesn't drink excessively. 2 bottles of wine with dinner last week when you visited. Beer at lunch when we met for the immigration consultation. I've been keeping notes because I was concerned about his mental state. Notes that probably didn't exist but would be created retroactively to support his story. But here's what really worries me, Sophia. Last night your father called me at home and made specific threats about what he'd do if I continued helping your mother with legal matters. He said, and I quote, "If you don't stay away from my wife, I'll make sure you regret it." I never made any such call. But a phone record could be falsified, especially by someone with legal connections. Marcus, that's serious. We should report it to the police. I already have. Filed a formal complaint this afternoon about harassment and threatening behavior. The officer who took the report suggested your father might benefit from a psychological evaluation. The trap was closing with surgical precision. Marcus was painting me as an unhinged older man whose paranoid delusions were escalating toward violence, while positioning himself as the concerned son-in-law trying to protect the family. Sophia, I think your father has been having some kind of mental breakdown. The stress of managing 25 restaurants, the isolation since your mother and I started working together on legal projects may be early-stage dementia. These things happen to men his age. My father is 65, not 95, and he's one of the sharpest businessmen in Texas. Was one of the sharpest. But success can mask decline for a while. The repeated questions, the memory lapses about conversations we've had, the increasing paranoia about financial matters. I think he needs professional help. What kind of help? Inpatient psychiatric evaluation. There are excellent facilities that specialize in geriatric mental health issues. With proper medication and therapy, he could stabilize. The masterpiece of manipulation was becoming clear. Marcus wasn't just planning to murder me. He was building a legal framework to have me declared mentally incompetent first, which would invalidate any evidence I might have gathered against him. Sophia's voice remained steady, but I could hear the underlying tension. And if Papa refuses to get help, then we'll have to petition the court for a guardianship order. Your mother would be appointed as his guardian with authority to make medical and financial decisions on his behalf. Complete control over my person and my assets legally sanctioned by a court that would see only a concerned family trying to help a declining patriarch. Marcus, this is all very sudden. Yesterday you were talking about Papa as a successful businessman, and now you're suggesting he needs psychiatric intervention. Sophia, I've been trying to protect you from the worst of it because of your pregnancy, but your father's behavior has been escalating for months. The threats, the accusations, the financial paranoia. I was hoping it would improve, but after last night's phone call, I realized we can't wait any longer. What phone call specifically did he make? He accused me of stealing from the restaurants, of manipulating your mother, of planning some kind of conspiracy against him. He said he had recordings and photographs, evidence of crimes that exist only in his imagination. Then he threatened to destroy my law practice and ruin my reputation if I didn't stop seeing your mother. Every piece of real evidence I'd gathered was being reframed as the delusions of a paranoid mind. The recordings would become fantasies. The surveillance footage would be dismissed as misinterpretation of innocent interactions. Sophia, I know this is hard to hear, but your father is becoming dangerous. Not just to himself, but to everyone around him. A long silence. Then Sophia's voice carefully modulated. What do you want me to do? Help us get him the treatment he needs. Your mother is terrified to be alone with him. She's been staying at my office late because she's afraid to go home to an increasingly unstable husband who might become violent. The final stroke was brilliant. My wife's presence at Marcus's office wasn't evidence of an affair, but proof of her fear of an abusive husband. Their conspiracy meetings became therapy sessions for a battered woman seeking help from her son-in-law. I'll think about what you've said, Sophia replied. But I need to talk to Papa myself before making any decisions about psychiatric intervention. Of course. But Sophia, please be careful. And if he says anything threatening, anything that makes you feel unsafe, call me immediately. I've already spoken to the police about establishing a pattern of threatening behavior. After Sophia left their apartment, I sat in my car listening to the recording, understanding the full scope of Marcus's counterattack. He'd anticipated that his conspiracy might be discovered and had prepared a devastating response. Every piece of evidence I'd gathered could be dismissed as the paranoid fantasies of a man experiencing mental decline. Every defensive action I'd taken could be reframed as the erratic behavior of someone losing touch with reality. But Marcus had made one critical error in his psychological warfare. He'd underestimated Sophia's ability to see through manipulation, and he'd given her exactly the ammunition she needed to destroy him. Because everything he'd just told her about my supposed threats and erratic behavior would be recorded, time-stamped, and documented. And when Sophia revealed that conversation to the police as evidence of Marcus's elaborate lies, his credibility would evaporate. The man who thought he was playing chess with amateurs was about to discover that his biggest mistake wasn't underestimating me. It was underestimating my daughter. The real war was just beginning, and Marcus had just handed us the weapons to win it. The police arrived at my flagship restaurant location at 11:15 a.m. the next morning, while I was reviewing inventory with my head chef, Carlos Mendoza. Two uniformed officers and a detective in an ill-fitting suit walked through the front door like they owned the place. David Martinez, Detective Thompson, Fort Worth, PD. We need to speak with you about a harassment complaint filed against you. I set down my clipboard and nodded to Carlos, who discreetly moved toward the kitchen to give us privacy. 30 years of running restaurants had taught me that police visits were never good for business, especially when customers could overhear the conversation. But what kind of harassment complaint? Your son-in-law Marcus Richardson has filed a formal report, alleging that you've been making threatening phone calls following him and his clients and engaging in behavior that constitutes stalking under Texas Penal Code. I felt the trap closing around me with mechanical precision. Marcus had moved faster than I'd anticipated, turning my investigation into evidence of my own criminal behavior. I haven't been harassing anyone, Detective. I've been investigating some concerns about my business and family finances. Detective Thompson consulted his notepad with the practiced indifference of someone who'd heard every excuse imaginable. According to Mr. Richardson, you called him at home Monday night and threatened to destroy his law practice if he didn't stop working with your wife on immigration cases. I never made any such call. You can check my phone records. We will. But Mr. Richardson also provided audio recordings of voicemails you left at his office recordings that contain what could be interpreted as threats against his professional reputation. My mind raced. What recordings I'd never left threatening voicemails at Marcus's office. But a skilled lawyer with access to voice manipulation software could easily create convincing evidence of conversations that never happened. I'd like to hear these alleged recordings. That can be arranged. Downtown, at the station. You're not under arrest, Mr. Martinez, but we'd like you to come in for questioning about these allegations. The invitation wasn't really optional. Refusing to cooperate would only make me look more guilty of whatever Marcus was claiming I'd done. I'll need to call my attorney, of course. But I should mention that Mr. Richardson has also expressed concerns about your mental state. He's provided documentation suggesting you may be experiencing some kind of psychological episode that's affecting your judgment. The psychiatric angle was already in play, positioning any defense I might offer as the ramblings of an unstable mind. Marcus had learned from the best, and the best was Victoria, who'd been manipulating situations to her advantage for longer than I'd realized. What kind of documentation, medical observations from your daughter Sophia, who's trained in psychology? Financial records showing erratic spending patterns and business decisions that suggest cognitive decline. phone records indicating obsessive calling patterns to various legal offices around the city. Sophia would never provide documentation, suggesting I was mentally unstable, which meant Marcus was forging her professional opinions using her credentials to legitimize his lies. Detective, I think there's been a serious misunderstanding. My son-in-law and my wife have been conspiring to defraud me of my business assets. I have recordings and surveillance evidence that proves their criminal activity. Detective Thompson's expression shifted from professional neutrality to something that looked like pity. Mr. Martinez, this is exactly the kind of paranoid thinking that Mr. Richardson described. He mentioned you might claim to have secret recordings and surveillance evidence of imaginary crimes. The perfect trap. Every piece of real evidence I'd gathered had been preemptively discredited as the delusions of a paranoid mind. Marcus had spent months studying my investigation techniques and had crafted countermeasures for everything I might present as proof. I'm not paranoid, detective. I'm being systematically robbed by people I trusted. Sir, I'm going to ask you to come downtown with us. We can do this voluntarily, or we can do it with a warrant. Your choice. The restaurant was beginning to fill with lunch customers, and I could see Carlos watching nervously from the kitchen doorway. A public arrest would destroy not just my reputation, but the reputation of every Corazon location. My employees depended on these restaurants for their livelihoods. I'll come voluntarily, but I want my attorney present before I answer any questions. The ride to the police station passed in humiliating silence. Through the windows, I watched my city roll by, the same streets where I'd built an empire that was now being stolen from me by legal maneuvers I'd never seen coming. At the station, they processed me like any other criminal suspect. Fingerprints, photographs, property inventory. The recording device in my phone was confiscated as evidence along with my wallet and car keys. James Santos arrived an hour later, his expression grim as he reviewed the charges Marcus had filed. David, this is more serious than I thought. They're alleging a pattern of harassment going back 6 months. Threatening phone calls, stalking behavior, financial intimidation. And they have what appears to be documented evidence supporting every claim. What kind of evidence? Audio recordings of you making threats, witness statements from office staff who claim you've been loitering outside the law firm, financial records showing you've been manipulating joint accounts to punish your wife for working with her son-in-law. All lies. But sophisticated lies crafted by someone who understood exactly how the legal system would interpret each piece of fabricated evidence. There's something else, James continued. They've filed for an emergency restraining order preventing you from contacting your wife, your son-in-law, or their place of business. And they're requesting a psychiatric evaluation based on your daughter's professional assessment of your recent behavior. Sophia would never sign such an assessment. According to the court filing, she's expressed concerns about your mental state to her husband, who documented those conversations as evidence of your declining cognitive function. Marcus was using Sophia's marriage to him as evidence that she'd confided in him about my supposed mental problems. Her psychology credentials were being weaponized against me by the very man she was helping to investigate. They're also requesting temporary guardianship over your business affairs, claiming you're no longer competent to manage financial decisions that affect family members who depend on those businesses for support. The final stroke. Not just my personal freedom, but control over the restaurants that employed hundreds of people and generated millions in revenue. Victoria would become my legal guardian with authority to sell, mortgage, or liquidate any asset she deemed necessary for my care. James, I need you to listen carefully. Everything they're claiming is part of an elaborate conspiracy to steal my assets and possibly kill me. I have recordings that prove their entire scheme. The attorney's expression shifted to the same look of pity I'd seen on Detective Thompson's face. David, I understand you're under enormous stress, but these kinds of conspiracy theories, they're not theories. They're documented facts. My wife and son-in-law have been planning to divorce me, take half my assets, and then murder me for the insurance money. David, stop. Right now, you sound exactly like what they're claiming you are. A paranoid man experiencing some kind of mental break. I realized with horrible clarity that Marcus had achieved his objective. By building a framework where any evidence I presented would be dismissed as delusional, he'd made it impossible for me to defend myself without appearing to confirm his accusations. The psychiatric evaluation was scheduled for 2 p.m. Friday afternoon at Riverside Mental Health Center. I sat in the waiting room filled with people whose problems seemed much simpler than mine, staring at motivational posters about healing and recovery while my entire life crumbled around me. Dr. Patricia Williams called my name at exactly 2:15. A woman in her 50s with kind eyes and the patient demeanor of someone who'd spent decades listening to troubled minds explain their realities. Mr. Martinez, I understand you've been experiencing some difficulties lately. Why don't you tell me what's been happening? The question felt like stepping into quicksand. Every word I spoke would be analyzed for signs of paranoid delusion, every emotion interpreted as evidence of mental instability. I've discovered that my wife and son-in-law are planning to steal my business assets through fraudulent divorce proceedings. Dr. Williams made notes without changing expression. How did you discover this? I overheard them discussing their strategy at my son-in-law's law office. They've been documenting my assets for months, planning to claim half of everything I've built over 30 years. And how do you feel about this discovery? Betrayed, angry, determined to stop them. Have you taken any actions based on these feelings? I protected my assets by freezing joint accounts and hired investigators to document their activities. More notes. Mr. Martinez, your family members have expressed concerns about your recent behavior. They describe someone who's become suspicious, accusatory, and potentially threatening. How would you respond to those concerns? The trap was elegant in its simplicity. Deny the accusations and appear defensive. Acknowledge them and appear to admit guilt. Either response would support Marcus's narrative. I would say that discovering your family plotting against you tends to change your behavior in predictable ways. Dr. Williams studied my file for several minutes. The silence stretched uncomfortably until a soft knock interrupted our session. Come in. Sophia entered the room, her face flushed with urgency. Dr. Williams, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I need to speak with you immediately about my father's case. I'm Sophia Richardson. I believe my husband provided documentation suggesting I'd expressed concerns about my father's mental state. Dr. Williams consulted her notes. Yes, Mr. Richardson indicated you'd shared professional observations about your father's cognitive decline and paranoid thinking. Sophia pulled out her phone and a manila folder thick with documents. Doctor, I need to inform you that every piece of documentation my husband provided was fabricated. I never made any such observations, and I have evidence that proves my father's accusations are completely accurate. What kind of evidence? Sophia connected her phone to Dr. Williams's computer. Audio recordings of my husband discussing plans to murder my father for insurance money. Financial records showing systematic asset documentation for divorce proceedings. Surveillance footage proving an 18-month affair between my husband and my mother. Dr. Williams leaned forward as Sophia played the enhanced audio from Marcus's office. The conversation about $10 million life insurance policies, double indemnity clauses, and restaurant kitchen accidents filled the small office. This recording was made Tuesday night, when my husband believed he was manipulating me into supporting his psychiatric claims against my father. The doctor's expression shifted from professional neutrality to genuine shock as she listened to Marcus discussing murder with the casual tone most people used for dinner plans. Dr. Williams, Sophia continued, my husband has been using my psychology credentials to legitimize false claims about my father's mental state. He's forged documentation suggesting I provided professional assessments that I never made. That's a serious allegation, Ms. Richardson. It's a serious crime. Sophia opened her folder and spread documents across the desk. These are the real financial records showing my husband and mother's conspiracy. Bank statements proving they've been funneling money into joint accounts. Research records showing my husband used his legal database access to study insurance fraud cases and restaurant fire investigation procedures. Dr. Williams examined each document with growing amazement. Mr. Martinez, were you aware your family had gathered this evidence? I had no idea Sophia was building a case file. I thought she was just confronting Marcus about the affair. Papa, I've been working with Mike Santos and James Santos since our meeting at the restaurant. We've been documenting everything while letting Marcus believe his psychological warfare was succeeding. Sophia pulled out additional recordings on a second device. This is my husband discussing how to frame my father's evidence gathering as paranoid delusion. And this is my mother explaining how to use domestic abuse laws to gain control of the restaurants. The room fell silent, except for the sound of Victoria's voice explaining how David's defensive actions could be reinterpreted as abusive controlling behavior. Dr. Williams removed her glasses and cleaned them slowly. Mr. Martinez, you an apology. Based on what I've seen and heard, you're not experiencing paranoid delusions. You're the victim of an elaborate criminal conspiracy. The relief was overwhelming. For the first time in days, someone in authority was acknowledging that I wasn't crazy, that my accusations were based on documented facts, rather than psychological breakdown. Sophia, how long have you been gathering this evidence? Since Wednesday morning, when Papa showed me the insurance documents. I realized Marcus was using my psychology training as a weapon, so I decided to use it as a shield instead. Dr. Williams began making rapid notes in my file. I'm going to recommend that all psychiatric proceedings against Mr. Martinez be dismissed immediately, and I'm legally obligated to report evidence of planned murder to law enforcement. Sophia smiled for the first time since this nightmare began. Detective Thompson is already reviewing our evidence. We're meeting with the district attorney's office at 4 p.m. today. What about the restraining order and guardianship proceedings? James Santos filed emergency motions this morning to dismiss all of Marcus's legal actions based on fraudulent documentation. The hearing is scheduled for Monday morning, but with this evidence, the outcome is predetermined. I looked at my daughter with a mixture of pride and amazement. You've been playing chess while I thought I was fighting for my life. Papa, you were fighting for your life. Marcus and Mama were literally planning to kill you, but they made one crucial mistake. What mistake, Tsu? They assumed that because I'm married to Marcus, I would automatically support him over you. They forgot that my professional ethics require me to report evidence of planned violence regardless of family relationships. Dr. Williams gathered our documents into a secure folder. Mr. Martinez, I'll be writing a comprehensive report documenting the fabricated evidence and fraudulent psychiatric claims. This should provide sufficient grounds for perjury charges against your son-in-law. Sophia stood and helped me to my feet. We need to go, Papa. Detective Thompson wants us downtown by 3:30 to review the criminal charges we're filing. As we walked toward the parking garage, I realized that what I'd interpreted as my darkest hour had actually been the setup for Marcus's complete destruction. He'd been so focused on discrediting me that he'd never noticed Sophia documenting his lies with the same methodical precision I'd learned from 30 years of business. The student had become the teacher, and the teacher was about to demonstrate exactly what happened when you underestimated a family that fought back. Marcus thought he'd won the war by making me look crazy. Monday morning arrived with unseasonable heat for October in Fort Worth. I walked up the granite steps of the Tarrant County Courthouse at 8:30 a.m., flanked by Sophia and James Santos, carrying a briefcase full of evidence that would either destroy Marcus and Victoria or finish destroying me. The emergency hearing on Marcus's restraining order and guardianship petition was scheduled for 9 a.m. in Judge Catherine Morrison's courtroom. A veteran family court judge with a reputation for cutting through manipulation and getting to the truth. Marcus sat at the plaintiff's table with his attorney, Linda Rodriguez, a sharp woman in an expensive suit who specialized in elder abuse cases. Behind them sat Victoria, dressed in conservative black like she was already mourning my competence. They looked confident, prepared, like people who'd built an unshakable case against a mentally unstable man who posed a danger to himself and others. They had no idea what was coming. All rise. The Honorable Judge Catherine Morrison presiding. Judge Morrison was a small woman with steel-gray hair and eyes that had seen every form of family deception imaginable. She settled behind the bench and reviewed the case file with methodical precision. We're here for emergency motions regarding Mr. David Martinez. Mr. Richardson, your attorney may proceed with arguments supporting the restraining order and guardianship petition. Linda Rodriguez stood with theatrical gravity. Your Honor, we're dealing with a tragic case of age-related mental decline that's manifested in increasingly dangerous behavior. Mr. Martinez has been stalking my client, making threatening phone calls and engaging in financial abuse of his wife through account manipulation, designed to punish her for seeking legal help. She gestured toward a stack of documents. We have audio recordings of Mr. Martinez making explicit threats against my client's law practice. Witness statements from office staff who've observed his erratic behavior. Financial records showing systematic abuse of joint accounts. And professional psychological assessment from his own daughter confirming cognitive decline and paranoid thinking. The performance was flawless. Every lie delivered with conviction, every fabricated document presented as irrefutable evidence of my mental deterioration. Furthermore, Your Honor, Mr. Martinez has been claiming to possess secret recordings and surveillance evidence of imaginary crimes. This type of elaborate paranoid fantasy is classic symptom of dementia-related psychosis. Judge Morrison made notes as Linda Rodriguez painted me as a dangerous man whose family was courageously seeking court protection from his increasing instability. Mr. Martinez poses an immediate threat to himself and others. The emergency guardianship is necessary to protect not only my client and Mrs. Martinez, but the hundreds of employees whose livelihoods depend on businesses that Mr. Martinez is no longer competent to manage. The final stroke was brilliant. I wasn't just a danger to my family, but to an entire community that depended on my restaurants for employment. Judge Morrison turned to James Santos. Counselor, your response. James stood slowly, his expression carrying the quiet confidence of someone holding royal flush. Your Honor, everything opposing counsel has presented is fabricated evidence designed to support an elaborate criminal conspiracy. Objection. Linda Rodriguez shot to her feet. That's exactly the kind of paranoid accusation we've been documenting. Overruled. Judge Morrison leaned forward with interest. Continue, Mr. Santos. Your Honor, Mr. Martinez isn't experiencing mental decline. He's the victim of a conspiracy involving his wife and son-in-law to steal his assets through fraudulent divorce proceedings and potentially murder him for insurance money. The courtroom erupted in gasps and whispered conversations. Victoria's face went white. Marcus maintained his composure, but I caught him glancing toward the exit. That's a serious allegation, Counselor. What evidence supports these claims? James connected his phone to the courtroom's audio system. We have 43 minutes of crystal-clear recordings made by Mr. Martinez when he inadvertently overheard his wife and son-in-law planning their conspiracy. Victoria's voice filled the courtroom with devastating clarity. When the old Mexican finally dies, we'll have everything we planned for. The silence was absolute, as Marcus's voice followed, discussing asset division, spousal support calculations, and insurance policy details with the casual tone of someone planning a business transaction. But more damning were the recordings Sophia had made during her confrontation with Marcus, where he discussed murder methods and timeline acceleration. Your Honor, James continued, as the audio played, every piece of evidence presented by opposing counsel was fabricated. The threatening phone calls, the witness statements, the psychological assessments. All lies designed to discredit Mr. Martinez before he could expose their criminal activity. Judge Morrison stopped the recording. Miss Rodriguez, do you have a response to these recordings? Linda Rodriguez looked like someone watching her career implode in real time. Your Honor, these recordings could have been doctored. Voice manipulation technology makes it possible to create convincing fake audio. James produced a second set of documents. We've had the recordings analyzed by FBI audio forensics specialists. They're completely authentic. Additionally, we have corroborating evidence from financial institutions, surveillance footage, and communication records that support every detail of the conspiracy. Sophia stood and approached the bench. Your Honor, I'd like to present evidence that my husband has been forging documents using my psychology credentials to support false claims about my father's mental state. She handed Judge Morrison a thick folder. These are the fabricated assessments my husband claimed I provided, alongside examples of my actual professional handwriting and assessment format. The forgeries are obvious when compared to authentic samples. Marcus finally lost his composure. Your Honor, my wife is obviously colluding with her father to avoid the consequences of his threatening behavior. Judge Morrison studied the documents with growing anger. Mr. Richardson, are you suggesting that a licensed psychologist would fabricate evidence to protect her father from legitimate psychiatric intervention? I'm suggesting that family loyalty can override professional ethics. The judge's expression hardened. Ms. Richardson, in your professional opinion, does your father show signs of mental impairment or paranoid delusion? Sophia's voice rang clear through the courtroom. Your Honor, my father shows signs of stress related to discovering that his family was plotting to steal his life's work and potentially end his life. His behavior has been completely rational given the circumstances he's been dealing with. Judge Morrison set down her gavel with finality that echoed through the chamber. Mr. Richardson, I'm dismissing your restraining order and guardianship petitions with prejudice. Furthermore, I'm referring this matter to the District Attorney's Office for investigation of perjury, fraud, and conspiracy charges. The courtroom erupted as Victoria stood and tried to rush toward the exit. Two bailiffs moved to block her path, while Marcus sat frozen at the plaintiff's table, watching his carefully constructed lies crumble into legal catastrophe. But the real justice was just beginning. As we gathered our evidence and prepared to leave, Detective Thompson entered the courtroom with handcuffs and arrest warrants. Marcus Richardson and Victoria Martinez, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, insurance fraud, and perjury in a court of law. I watched my wife of 30 years and the man I'd treated like a son being led away in handcuffs, their conspiracy destroyed by the very evidence they'd tried to discredit as paranoid fantasy. The war was over. Truth had won. But the real victory wasn't legal. It was standing beside my daughter, whose courage and intelligence had saved not just my life and fortune, but the lives of hundreds of employees who depended on Corazon restaurants for their families' security. Justice had been served exactly as it should be, with evidence, determination, and the unbreakable bond between a father and daughter who refused to let evil win. 6 months later, I stood in the kitchen of my newest Corazon location in Arlington, watching Sophia teach my 3-month-old granddaughter, Isabella, how to clap her tiny hands together. The baby's laughter filled the space where betrayal and conspiracy had once dominated my thoughts. The trials had concluded in March. Marcus received 15 years for conspiracy to commit murder insurance fraud and multiple perjury charges. Victoria got 12 years for her role in the financial conspiracy and attempted fraud. Both were ordered to pay full restitution, though the money meant nothing compared to having my life back. Sophia had divorced Marcus the day after his arrest, reclaiming her maiden name and building a new practice specializing in elder abuse detection. Her experience with family manipulation had given her insights that helped dozens of other families recognize and escape similar conspiracies. The baby gurgled and reached for a wooden spoon, completely unaware that her existence had once been viewed as an obstacle to her grandfather's murder. Papa Sophia called from across the kitchen. "Channel 7 wants to interview you again about the senior safety program." I waved dismissively. "They've heard enough from me. This should be about helping other families, not making me famous." The media attention had been overwhelming but useful. My story had prompted hundreds of elderly people across Texas to contact authorities about suspicious family behavior, leading to the discovery of at least 12 other financial conspiracies targeting senior citizens. But tonight wasn't about media interviews or criminal justice. Tonight was about the lesson I'd promised to share with the senior community, the hard-earned wisdom that might save other families from the nightmare we'd endured. The Arlington Senior Center filled with over 200 people by 7 p.m. Men and women who'd worked hard their entire lives, built businesses, and raised families, accumulated the kind of wealth that made them targets for the very people they'd trusted most. Good evening, everyone. My name is David Martinez, and I'm here to share a story that could save your life. The room fell silent as I began with the words that had become my opening at every speaking engagement. 18 months ago, I thought I had the perfect family. A successful business, a loving wife of 30 years, a son-in-law who seemed devoted to our daughter. I was wrong about almost everything. I told them about that Tuesday night discovery at Marcus's office about the recordings that revealed a conspiracy 18 months in the making. About the insurance policies, the murder plans, the psychological warfare designed to make me appear mentally incompetent. But most importantly, I shared the warning signs that every senior citizen needed to recognize. First, be suspicious when family members suddenly become interested in your finances after years of indifference. Victoria had spent our entire marriage letting me handle business matters, then suddenly wanted detailed information about asset values and insurance policies. A gray-haired woman in the front row raised her hand. "My daughter-in-law has been asking a lot of questions about my will lately. Should I be concerned? How long has she been married to your son? 3 years. And she's never shown interest in inheritance matters before, never. She always said money talk made her uncomfortable. I'd recommend having independent legal counsel review your estate planning. Don't let family members pressure you into changes that benefit them disproportionately. Second, watch for coordinated behavior between family members who normally don't spend much time together. Marcus and Victoria had never been particularly close until their conspiracy began. Third, be alert to medical or psychological claims designed to question your competence. This is often the precursor to guardianship proceedings that can strip away all your rights. A man in his 70s stood up. "My son keeps saying I'm getting forgetful, that I need help managing my investments. But I remember everything fine. Have you been evaluated by an independent physician? No, just my son's observations. Get a professional cognitive assessment from a doctor who has no connection to your family. Document your mental acuity with official medical records that can't be disputed. Fourth, maintain financial independence regardless of family pressure. Keep accounts that only you can access. Never sign papers without independent legal review. Trust your instincts when something feels wrong. The questions continued for over an hour. Stories of suspicious relatives, uncomfortable financial conversations, family members pushing for power of attorney or joint account access. Each story reinforced how common these targeting tactics were becoming. But the most important lesson wasn't about recognizing threats. It was about the power of truth and family bonds that couldn't be broken by greed or manipulation. My daughter Sophia could have chosen her husband over her father. She could have believed his lies about my mental state, supported his petition for guardianship, allowed the conspiracy to succeed. Instead, she chose courage over comfort, truth over convenience. Not every family has a Sophia, but every family has the potential for someone to stand up when evil tries to win. The key is maintaining relationships with people who love you for who you are, not what you own. As the evening concluded, an elderly woman approached the podium with tears in her eyes. "Mr. Martinez, I think my nephew and his wife are planning something similar. The insurance questions the concern about my driving, the suggestions about assisted living. What should I do? Start documenting everything. Record conversations if your state allows single-party consent. Get independent legal and medical evaluations. And most importantly, find at least one family member or friend who you can trust completely, someone who can be your advocate if things escalate." I gave her James Santos's contact information and the number for Adult Protective Services. 6 months ago, I'd thought my life was over. My wife of 30 years had been planning my murder. My son-in-law had been using my daughter's credentials to destroy my reputation. My business empire had been mapped for systematic theft. But I'd learned something valuable in the process. The people who truly love you will stand with you when tested. The people who don't love you will reveal themselves when money is involved. And the difference between those two groups is the most important knowledge you can possess. Tonight, driving home through the same Fort Worth streets where this nightmare had begun, I felt genuinely at peace for the first time in years. The Corazon restaurant chain was stronger than ever, employing over 800 people across 32 locations. Sophia's practice was thriving, helping other families navigate the kind of crisis we'd survived. And baby Isabella would grow up knowing that her grandfather had fought for truth, and won that family meant something more than financial opportunity, that courage could triumph over conspiracy when good people refused to give up. The American dream I'd chased for 40 years had been nearly destroyed by the people closest to me. But it had been saved by something more powerful than money or manipulation. It had been saved by love that was real, justice that was earned, and a daughter who chose right over easy when the moment of truth arrived. Some lessons can only be learned through fire. But once learned, they burn away everything false and leave only what matters most. Family. Truth. The unshakable knowledge that character matters more than wealth, and that evil may win battles, but never the war. That was the lesson worth sharing, the story worth telling, the truth that could save other families from learning it the hard way. If this story resonated with you or reminded you of someone you know, please share it in the comments below. Have you experienced similar warning signs in your own family? Your story could help protect other seniors from falling victim to these devastating conspiracies. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more real-life stories that expose the truth about family betrayal and financial fraud. Hit that notification bell so you never miss a story that could change your life or save someone you love. And if you want to hear another shocking tale of deception and justice, click on the video in the description below. Trust me, you won't believe what happens when greed meets its match. Thank you for listening, and remember, the truth is always worth fighting for.